Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to have everyone here tonight. I think there are one or two still to come, but I'll just let everybody find a seat. We have plenty of space. Richard has pointed out that the slides have got not the largest writing, so if you might struggle to see it from where you are, you might want to think about coming a bit closer, but you will find out once they start coming up. So here's somebody coming in. Lovely. So thank you for coming. This is one of the milestones in a journey that we are continuing to take. You know that we agreed to set up a diversity group, and that diversity group has met a few times. In services, we've started to mark Black History Month back in October, and then Racial Justice Sunday, just that Sunday gone. And this was the next kind of action, which was to have diversity training. So I'd like to welcome Rosemarie and to say a very big thank you, because I approached you at a Deanery Synod and basically said, I can take this off, and basically said, well, this could work two ways. One is that we could try and pack out your public courses over the next 2 years, or would you like to come and see us? And you very gladly, very kindly said, let me run one first and then I'll come to you. So that's why we're here. So we're in for sort of January, February, and here we are. So this is a public course which is run as part of the Ministry Matters for the diocese. So all sorts of people will go on that. But Rosemary has come to deliver this to us. So thank you very much for making the trip. It is going to be recorded as well as being live streamed. So hopefully we'll have that as a resource and we'll hand that over to you as well. So if that's of any use to you, then please do pass that on. So, yeah, thanks for coming along, and I will have a very engaging and enlightening experience. We just pray before we begin. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your diverse creation, and that when you made humanity, you said it was very good. And we come tonight to celebrate that very goodness that comes from you, and that we might see that in each and every person that we meet. And we thank you for Rosemary for putting this session together and for coming and sharing it with us tonight. And we pray that we will see your light into our dark places, and that from there we can be light ourselves. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There we go. Now you can hear me. Ooh, that's a lot of echo. So yes, I was just saying, it's really great because, as you know, I started as Archdeacon just seconds, almost minutes, hours before the pandemic was landed upon us, and so it's great now to be able to come out and meet people. But in my role as Archdeacon, as also the diocesan lead for diversity and inclusion. And the course that we're going to just take some time to work through tonight is on the nature and impact of unconscious bias. This course has been prepared by the Church of England and the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion, backed up by research and then kind of honed to work specifically for our diocese. There's going to be bits of it when I'm going to be talking, and there's going to be bits of it when you are going to be working together in groups as well. So it's interactive and not just didactic listening to me. You know, because you now have your diversity group and you've started to dig in to the anti-racism charter that we've produced, that the diocese has a vision to grow leadership and representation that reflects the diversity of our diocese, and focusing on the most underrepresented areas of that diversity. In some areas that will be through ethnicity, through age, through educational opportunities, through class, through tradition. All of these things are really important for us. When I started training in the diocese in 2005, we were doing courses such as racial awareness training and ministering across cultures. And then part of that training seemed to be just a kind of usual institutional response to the issue of racism. And that was very similar to the anti-racism training that was being undertaken by other major institutions, the police, National Health Service, civil servants, and I taught on some of those courses as well. But what we found is that those courses actually didn't promote inclusion. What they kind of did is sometimes made people feel that they were being labelled in a way as either in or out. You know, you needed it because you were racist, and if you did it, you could tick a box and say, I'm no longer whatever that was. And that's not what we really wanted to do. So what we wanted to do is bring a course together which helps everybody, all of us, look at our own biases, conscious and unconscious, and to help us find ways to maybe recognize them. And then as we recognize things and have more insight into them, that also helps us to deal with them when they come up. So that's the purpose of the course. The first scripture you have in front of you that really speaks into this course is this from John, which is our commandment. Not just the commandment, not just our baptism covenant to know that we are all children of God, that we are all blessed and recognized and created in God's image, but our Lord gave us a commandment to love each other and to love everything of each other. And that includes issues that make people different to us. And that's so important. So that commandment from our Lord to love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And that's our absolute imperative. And so that's the grounding of which we do this training. So then the next slide, please. So this just tells you what we're going to work through tonight. We're going to have an overview of the concept of unconscious bias. We're going to highlight the differences between the concepts of diversity and inclusion and the importance of them. We're going to look at fast and slow thinking, some techniques to reduce or manage bias, and if we get to it, some action planning going forward. So next slide. That's it. Now, I tell you what, I have a problem, and my problem is I have new glasses, and if you think that's small, I can't see what's up on the screen, so let me just go back. Okay. That's the definition of what unconscious bias is, or implicit bias is, which is, but I was expecting another slide, so I'm just going to see what slide comes up. Can you put another slide up for me, and I see what we get? Can you put the next slide up and see what we get? There are some slides missing, and I don't know why that has happened. Okay. So I'm going to give you a quick teaser. It's not on there, so you're going to have it in your minds. Okay? Ready for it? A bat and a ball. If you know it, don't tell the neighbour. A bat and a ball cost £1.10. Got that? The bat costs £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Don't tell your neighbour. Bat and a ball together cost £1.10. The bat's £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Okay, that's it. Just hold that in your mind and we'll get back to that. As we go through this evening, we're going to listen to each other. We're going to participate. And if some things come up that perhaps we find difficult, we're going to just hold them, remembering that difference and the need to love each other. So that's I just wanted to say that. So now, another scripture that I think speaks to unconscious bias is the one reading from 1 Timothy, where it says, "In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without favor, doing nothing from partiality." And the one thing about unconscious bias, whether we know it or not, because of the reality of human nature and the way in which we use our preferences, what we do find is that we are very good at showing partiality. It's almost like a function of humanity, that we show partiality. So that scripture from 1 Timothy 5:21 very clearly tells us that the rules that we must keep without favor and doing nothing from partiality. So that's something to hold in our minds. Okay. So the next slide, I'm hoping it's going to be the one that needs to come up. It is. Excellent. Great. Who remembers this game? Now I'm just looking at all of you. You all ought to remember it. So, what's the name of the game? Guess who? See, it's perfect. Now, I had a little conversation with Bijoy earlier, and I was trying to describe our new Chief Inspector of Police for Croydon for him. How did I describe him? So often, when we go to say something about someone that we don't know very well, we as adults can be actually really cautious about how we describe people because we don't want to cause offense. Children, like in this game, are not that cautious. Because generally with children there's no artifice, then they will just use what they see in front of them. Because of the way in which we show partiality, we actually are not that good at describing people because we've got in our head already all the things that create distance, fear of offending, fear of mentioning something that might be very different, whether it's their religion, whether it's their skin color, whether it's their ethnic identity. We can find ourselves in a mixed grouping, not using any of those phrases, but maybe with our friends we might say it very clearly. So, what we find is that people can be very uncomfortable, and that discomfort is actually part of the trigger to the unconscious bias. Does that make sense? It is the discomfort because of the biases that are already set in. So, which bias do you think, which difference do you think makes the majority of people feel uncomfortable? Which difference do you feel makes, in terms of the research that's been done, that makes people feel most uncomfortable to describe to another person? Which difference? And remember, it doesn't matter because we're training here together, so there's no embarrassment. But which difference do you think we have the most difficulty in describing to another person? Nope.
Body shape.
Nope. Nope. Nope, that was that one. No.
Sex.
Nope. 87% of people found this identifier the most difficult to describe to another person.
Age.
Nope. Nope. Because I said to Bijoy, he's a Pakistani Muslim. I thought that spoke. I couldn't remember his name, basically. I'll tell you what it is. Disability. Disability. We have more difficulty in how we use, or how we talk about people, depending on their levels of disability. In fact, many disabled people, or people who are physically disabled and find themselves having to use a wheelchair or something like that, often say that people either look straight through them, they smile this beatific platonic smile at them as if they're all the age of, a baby, or they talk to the people over their head who are pushing the wheelchair or whatever. So they have great difficulty in engaging with folk, particularly those who have some level of physical disability and don't think about any kind of level of mental health challenge, because then we're all over the place in terms of how we engage with people with mental health challenges. So this slide about social distance and diversity is really important because it starts to speak to some of the issues that we find. So the next slide should come up, and it says, diversity and inclusion, what do these terms mean to you? So we've got 3 natural groups, kind of one here, and one here. You're a bit far from each other, but you might manage it. Because I want you to just spend a little bit of time just talking about what the word diversity means and giving some descriptors, because I'm going to come back to you, but you need to discuss it. Can you discuss it? Can you discuss it? And then when you've done diversity for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, do inclusion, please. I've got a metal hip, I couldn't be doing that.
inclusion.
No, I'm just listening.
There's people in wheelchairs, because when you're at the front, you see the people in wheelchairs at the back. You see Robert at the front conducting away. So you see all sorts. You see them in a single glance. So you see diversity. Some places you don't see diversity. I worked for Network Rail in engineering projects, and all the heads of all the departments, they were all 45-year-old white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Yes. Maybe not Protestant.
If you've been talking about diversity and you haven't started on thinking about inclusion, do start to think about the definitions for inclusion. Okay, just a couple more moments and then we'll come back together again. Is that okay? Can't you hear it very well?
Are each of the groups going to report back to you?
Yeah, they're going to just, yeah.
What we'll do is we'll give them a
Perfect, perfect, thank you. Well, you're about to be given a roving mic to report back, so I think just a few seconds and then we'll, I don't want to send you home late tonight. Okay. Let's come back together now. And I don't know. So first of all, we're going to start with definitions of diversity from the different groups. I can see that some people have been writing, so there's a roving mic. So whoever's been writing might just report from each group. That would be good. Diversity first, please.
A wide range of differences. The more, the better. Even thinking differently. Enjoying the differences. We thought about accents, especially in London. What marks us out as being different? People from different areas, that might be within London, different areas of the country, different schools, different religions, which football club, the presence of people from different ages, status, so on, in the same space.
Next group.
So similar to the other group, but I also kind of gave the way that I frame diversity, and it's bringing around a different frame of reference. So we may all be looking at the same picture, but actually what I'm bringing to the table is my culture, my background, my experience, my age, my gender, whereas somebody like Chris will be bringing a completely different frame of reference to view the picture. And as we kind of share that, actually our frames don't change, they just expand.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good definition or reference point.
Great. I've no idea whether this is collective view or not. It's a recognition, awareness and acceptance of all sorts. Be that of age, gender, race, ability, class, social status, religious background, education.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think I heard them, but I just, because we're going to come to inclusion in a minute. I heard them, but I was very interested that I heard some of the 9 protected characteristics. I heard some of them. Do you know all of them? 9 protected characteristics. You know that there are 9 legally protected characteristics of difference in this country that you have to pay attention to. And if you don't, or if you use them in any way negatively, then legally you can find yourself in a lot of trouble. So, Bijoy is nodding away. So Bijoy, tell me the 9 characteristics, please.
Gender, religion, age, race, sexuality.
Yep.
Yeah.
That goes with the... Yeah, go ahead.
Is it marital status?
Well done. That's one of the ones that people often forget.
Disability.
Yep. One more.
I think I said gender. Pregnancy?
Got it. Pregnancy and maternity. And those are the absolute protected characteristics in this country that we, if we're in terms of proper recruitment and the way in which we engage with people, we have to bear those in mind. Those are legal. Now, you've mentioned the wonderful ways in which we can, kind of give a definition of diversity. One of the things that's wonderful that people often don't give when they give this differences is that, they're really important to us, strangely enough, because we are one church, one faith, one baptism, and yet we have a multiplicity of denominations, theological opinions, church traditions, and they're also part of our diversity. And they're really important as for Christians. So it's you know, that's what I was saying about, these are good things. We don't necessarily always use them for good, but they do make up, like the flowers, you know, out there, they do make up the ways in which we are different. So that's really, really important, that we also remember those, as well as our personalities and our different frames of reference and the things that we bring to the table. We also bring to the table the ways in which we enjoy worshiping. And that's really important as well, and that's part of our diversity. So inclusion, please. Again, maybe this time, yes, it's whoever, I was going to say maybe another person, but it's fine. So inclusion.
So inclusive, welcoming people who are diverse within the space that we're in. Be actively thinking about it, keeping the diversity in mind. Does inclusivity include equality? Having people equally present at the table. It includes caring for others, inviting and thinking of the people not in the room or in the space. But being inclusive can also be negative in the sense of having, say, a membership base and therefore excluding those people who are not in that membership.
Okay, so who gets excluded? Okay. It's often the way, isn't it? We always say, we're so welcoming, we're so inclusive. And then sometimes we have to look around and say, okay, we all look the same here. Are we that welcoming and inclusive? Next group, please.
We gave the example of, diversity might be saying, well, I gave the example of, I might say to Bees, you're a really good speaker. And we really value in that, but inclusion is if Bees is actually doing the speaking. So it's the action as well as the thought.
Okay, I like that. Okay, thank you very much. And the final group, thank you.
Okay. I've written, inclusion is being actively open and welcome to all, whilst recognising and valuing those differences and similarities regardless.
Okay. Oh, I like that one. I like that. Thank you very much. If we can have the next slide, please. I've got it, hopefully. I've got that right. Right. So, nice and simple. After all of that, diversity is about the mix of people in your setting. That's at its most simple. Yeah? It's just the mix. And I heard somebody over there talking about looking out from a stage or a place and just seeing the whole mix of everybody in front of you, in all of their wonderful complexities and differences, just looking out and seeing that's who we are. And inclusion, which should be the next slide. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 words. That's it. So if diversity is about the mix of people in your setting, inclusion is about making the mix work. That's, which I've heard in the ways in which you've talked about welcoming and actively thinking about it, but it's actually making it work. And actually recognizing, and I think that word about equality, that it's not always about equality. You know, in the Bible it talks about equity. Yeah? Because we don't all set off on the same level playing field, and we can't always get to the same level playing field because of our differences. So we shouldn't necessarily be saying, right, we're trying to make everybody equal, because we may not be able to do so in the ways in which we think of equal, that's in our human way, because of the difference, the glorious differences that people bring to a table. It may not always be. We might all sit at the same table, but even as we sit at them, in terms of equity, we're at that table because of the different experiences of our life, the different frames of reference, and they have to be recognized. And that's about being equitable, as opposed to trying to say we're all equal, because we're not, and we never will be. But we should always work towards equity. And inclusion is important because It's a gospel imperative. And that's where we started from with our first quote from Scripture. It's a gospel imperative. It means that we should all want to make sure everyone feels valued, everyone feels welcome, and everyone is able to contribute to the best of their abilities, that they are recognized and that they're there to be able to contribute for the benefit of the team, for the benefit of the church, for the benefit of the kingdom. And we should be ensuring that we just get the best out of everybody. And that's the only way we can do that, if we accept the differences as part of the glorious work of God's blessings upon us, and then find ways to include it. And that's how we need to reflect the kingdom and model inclusivity. And I think a key thing to say is that having diversity does not lead to inclusion. Yeah? And that's key to know it. So this thing about, we must get more people of colour in. That doesn't necessarily lead to inclusion. Or we must have more of this, and we must do that. And that's the key thing about the Anti-Racism Charter. We know that it's not about just bringing people in. Because if you bring people in and they're not fully equipped and accepted and included, then you haven't made an equitable situation to encourage everyone to be of their best. So it's not just about looking out and saying, we've got some children in our congregation. Isn't that amazing? If we then pat them on the head and say, what did you do? How lovely, sit quietly. You know? Or we've got this wonderful group of folk who've got different abilities, whether they come from L'Arche or whatever, and we look out and say, we're a church, we're so welcoming, but then we have no capacity to be able to ensure that their gifts and their skills are also brought to the table as well. So it's not just about, it's not a skin colour thing. And I think when people hear these words, we're going to talk about diversity, or we're going to talk about this, then they think, it's about skin colour. It's not. It's about all the wonderful ways that God has created us as different to each other and how we do that. But there are some groups, as I said at the beginning, who find themselves more challenged to be included, to be welcomed, to be in leadership. And that's where the diocese is really trying to ensure that we embed our anti-racism charter. So, just the next slide, and I hope this comes up in a way that I can see it. Yeah, I'm going to have to go to it because I can't see a thing from here. So, just a few stats, and I'll read them because they're going to be too small for you to see. Diversity in England and in the Church of England, as I said, a few stats. So thinking in terms of the group that we would call UK minority ethnic, and as you will know from our paperwork, we use that phrase now because the people that we might include in that category of UKME are only minority ethnic because of living in this country. You know, we can't say that people from China are minority ethnic in the global world because they're not. So it's only the context of this country, which is why we no longer use BAME, but we use UKME to embed that understanding that it's only because of our context. So in terms of our population of this country, across the country in England, just almost 14% people come from UKME backgrounds, but in Greater London it's between 40 and 60%. In terms of members of the Church of England, it's 4.7%, but in the Diocese of Southwark, it's approximately 30%, but probably now about 35% coming from UKME backgrounds. In terms of our clergy numbers, we've got across the country 4%, and in Southwark 11 to 12%. If we think of our population in England, of female population, 51%, members of the Church of England who are women, 60%, members of the Church of England, clergy, 30%. And if you think that Southwark is out there, you know, doing really, really well, we're actually in the middle quartile, and we're only 25%. actually quite low in terms of women incumbents. In terms of our age over 70 in this country, 12%. In the Church of England, 30%. People with a disability working age England, 20%. People with a disability of working age, approximately in the Church of England, nearly 40%. Clergy with a disability, we don't measure it. So that's just some statistics for you to kind of get a feel for the way in which diversity is reflected in the church and in our nation. And it makes a difference, because if we want to be inclusive with statistics like that, you can see that we've got work to do across gender, across ableism, as well as ethnicity. So that's one of the things. Now the next slide is, and it doesn't include Croydon. So, when this slide was made, and we haven't got a new one, it's 11 years old, like our census. And when it was made, you can see that the Kingston area and the Woolwich area, all those bands, particularly the green bands, and look at Woolwich, you look at those green bands, those are all the bands that show over 51% of people from UKME backgrounds in our congregations. And you can see it's almost, coming up to at least over a third of our deaneries. In the Kingston area, we have much less than that, and it's mainly Lambeth North and then Tooting and Battersea where we start to see, and Lambeth South where we start to see numbers going up. In Croydon at the time, they didn't even do the stats, because if they did them now, we'd probably look at similar pattern to Woolwich, because of the increase in numbers of people moving out from more central London into areas like Thornton Heath and Norbury and all of those places, and further south, and the new people joining our congregations as well. But you can just see that the Diocese of Southwark, as I said earlier, is an extremely diverse area. So I almost got distracted because I was looking at that picture and I was thinking the colours. So you forgive me, I'm a bit can get distracted. The colours look like the Wordle colours. So, the next slide, please. So this one talks about, I think it's the church survey. And it says, if congregations, and this is still pertinent, if congregations in England were 100 people, as I said earlier, 59 would be female, 11 would be children under age 11, 9 would be over 76, 7 would be minority ethnic, though in Southwark it would be 30, 37 would have at least one health issue or disability, including mobility impairments. That's the Church of England. Is it your church? If clergy were 100 people, then 77 would be male, 55 would be over 50, and over only across England, 3 would be UKME, though in Southwark that would be 11. And again, I heard you talk about, this gentleman talk about some offices where you might go and see very little diversity. And that image that I've just painted in terms of our clergy represents still, although it's changing, it represents that lack of diversity. And it's not just the Church of England. It really isn't. Because if you look across the NHS in terms of the middle level and upper management, if you look, you've been following the conversations around what's happening in the Met Police? And it's such a sad thing, because Bijo and I will know that the Croydon Metropolitan Police are working their socks off to make a difference and to be different in terms of how they respond to the needs of our Croydon community across the board, whether it's in Reigate or whether it's in Coulsdon or Purley or whether it's in Thornton Heath. They're really working their socks off. And they, being with them, when these statistics come out, as I was last Friday, when we had that, the Charing Cross debacle with the all the tweets and the messages that were misogynistic, that were racist, that were homophobic, just awful. And they were there trying to not explain it, but trying to show how different they were trying to be. So it's not certainly something to say we're here, pillory in the Church of England, because so many of our major institutions are exactly the same. So we can skip the next slide, and then let me just see it. Okay, that's just talking about higher education. Let me see. Next slide. Okay, we've missed one. Don't worry about it. I don't know why it's missed out. Did you remember me asking you earlier about the bat and the ball? Great. Who's worked it out? So 2, 3. Okay, fantastic. So it looks like people are really great. Who thought the ball cost 10p? You put your hand up, there's no shame in anything. Great, fantastic. Who thought it cost 5p? A few more. Who couldn't work it out? Do you know, it took me about 4 times to work this out. The answer is? 5. And don't worry if you didn't get it, because neither did half of the Harvard graduates who were given this test. So don't worry about it. So who knows how to work it out? So this is like countdown without the flip chart. Who can say how they worked it out? Okay, great. Go on then. So microphone, just for those of us who still have difficulties. Okay, here we go. Yes?
Take the pound off first, and then halve what you've got left.
Okay. Have you all got that? You all got it? A bat and a ball cost £1, 10 pence.
She is a maths teacher.
Okay, see? Because the difference has to be the pound. And once the difference is the pound, then you know that it's 5p. Yeah? If you think it's 10p because you go £1.10 and you just take the 10p, actually the difference, then the whole total becomes £1.20. And that's the difference. But the reason why we get to that, and we see the £1.10, because what does our brain do? What does our brain do for the most of us who are not math teachers? Yeah, it does some fast thinking, and it just looks at it and it says, it must be 10p because one's a pound and that's 10p. So there you go, ipso facto, it must be 10p, and that's about it. And that's what most of us do, unless you're like me who go, I can't work it out. It's called maths. So we use our quick thinking to come to an answer. And that's where we can find ourselves with some challenges. So there's a picture of a brain, and we're going to come now to the essentials. Oh, sorry, I think it's the speakers. The essentials of unconscious bias, because that's where all the unconscious bias happens. It happens in our brain, in those synapses, and the speed of those synapses, as we try to make sense of the world in front of us, our brain is always working, probably faster than even we think. Our brain is working to try to get us to an answer really quickly. So what that earlier slide said is that unconscious biases can be defined as our implicit preferences formed by our socialization, our experiences, and by our exposure to other views about other people. See? So it's our implicit preferences formed by our socialization, our experiences, and by our exposure to others' views about other groups of people. And as I said earlier, it's not about ethnicity, it's not about skin color. It's, we've just had this conversation, I don't know if you saw it last week, where Whoopi Goldberg said, well, the Holocaust wasn't racist because both groups were white. Well, don't tell a Jewish person that, please. And I don't think you could have told a Nazi that. And that's the point. You know, she needed to keep her mouth closed, very much so, because that was nonsense. And I think we've just got another set of conversations about, is it, what's his name? I don't know him. Jimmy Carr, somebody? Again, making comments about the traveller community. So, the ways in which people can use this unconscious bias to make fast comments that might seem funny, but actually are deeply, deeply offensive when they're reflected upon. So, ethnicity is the particular, though not exclusive lens that we are looking at, but all the other things that we've talked about are subject to bias. Okay. So if we can have I hope we're going to get the next slide. Okay. So down on that left-hand side, when we talk about unconscious bias, these are the essentials of unconscious bias. They're involuntary, they're effortless, they're intuitive, and we have a massive resource for getting to a solution quickly. Does that make sense? So when I talk about that massive resource, we can understand what that means now. It's like having our phones and putting on Google search. That's what our brains do, isn't it? They click on Google search in our head, and they come up with a quick top of the answer that comes at the very top. It's not always the answer we want, actually, but it's the one that comes up top because Google has already, people who use computers know better than me, but it's already worked out the algorithms as to what they think you're asking and what answer you might want to hear. So when you click and ask that question, the top one that comes up, it's not necessarily the one you wanted, but it's the one that comes up because of the way the algorithms work. So, involuntary means that we didn't, as you know these, come on, we didn't have to think about it. It was effortless. It was right there in our minds already. And we have this massive resource. And the massive resource, what did you say earlier, Bijoy, about a frame of reference that you bring with you?
Yeah, it's kind of based on your experience, your age, etc.
That's your massive resource. That's what you bring with you. But it can also be your downfall because it might actually guide you to make the wrong decision because you're bringing with it some preconceived notions into a situation. And that's what we all do. We all arrive at the table, as you said, with our frames of reference, our culture, our experience, our age, our work capacity, all of that comes to the table. And then when something is asked or something comes up, that's what we use immediately to start to make a decision. So that's what we call fast thinking. So some examples of fast thinking, if I can get it quickly. So this is, what do we use for fast thinking? So just think of I know it's an easy one there, I don't want to give it to you. It's too easy. When I was growing up as a child, we had to learn our times table. And we had it on the back of our exercise books. And all of us could do, and I'm not talking about you, madam, all of us could get up to 6 without a worry. Yeah? 6 times tables. 7, starting to get into those odd numbers. So we were, 8, 9s. And then 10s are always easy, 5s are easy. So we know those answers to 2 plus 2 and 2 times 2 and everything else. What about if I asked you 24 times 17? What do we need to be able to do 24 times 17? And you're not Carol Vorderman or her replacement. Pen and paper. We need slow thinking. Because we've got to find a way to work it out, because it's not obvious. And that's when we turn to the need for slow thinking. So the next slide. Slow thinking, you have to do it, you have to want to do it, it's voluntary, you have to make an effort. And slow thinking is rule-driven. It's rule-driven. There are rules to the ways in which we look at things. And the final thing about slow thinking, the resources for them are smaller. Smaller, because the experiential pool of those things are smaller. So unless you're a maths teacher, and I spent 13 wonderful years having a maths professor as my SSM, so I got to know about the importance of maths almost every day. And the rules that go with maths, and how it's so rule-driven. But once you know the rules, it's actually quite easy, but you have to know the rules. So our slow thinking is more rule-driven. Our fast thinking is something that's involuntary and intuitive. We just know it. We just know it. Okay. So, next slide, please. The thing about, yes, I've got 5. The thing about human thinking and cognitive biases, because this is what this is about, is, and I think they're going to come in maybe all together or one by one. They're going to come in one by one, all together. Is our brains use the 2 systems at the same time? Obviously. We don't do, I'll do a bit of slow thinking now. Our brains are doing it all the time. Every time we go into a room, our thinking is adjusting to the circumstances of that room or that situation. We're always adjusting. So we may come into a space and think, oh, this is fine. I know everybody in here looks like me, so I'll be really comfortable. We might be thinking that. It might not be the case, but that's what we might be thinking. So we're always assessing a situation. Now, the reason why we humans can do that is because of our evolution. We've had to use fast thinking for dangerous circumstances. So clearly, I think the bishop likes to tell this story of, if you're in a space and you see an elephant over there, and you think, oh, that's rather lovely. I'd like to take that picture of that elephant. It looks like it's quite far away. Let's drive the car a bit closer. And then when you realize actually the elephant is much closer than you thought it was, you've got to scamper out of there very quickly because of the danger of the situation. So we use, as human beings, our fast thinking often to get us through a circumstance or a situation, but we developed it. And our slow thinking, we developed, that developed later on. So this is where our brain is hardwired. So we've got the 2 systems operating simultaneously. And one of the things that human beings like to do, and I mentioned it earlier, is we put people into categories. And that is the fundamental, I used to say that I believe that the fundamental sin, human sin, is about putting people into categories. Because the first thing that we did was we put God into a category as being other to us. When Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, they put themselves into skins, and their Creator, who made them in his image, could not see them because he was now different to them. And there was a fundamental difference about how we saw ourselves and how we saw the Creator. And from that time, animals, as God tells us about how we deal with a snake, we have used categories to describe in our minds danger and welcome about different types of people. And the further they are, or the more different they are to us, the more that we categorize them negatively until we understand them. And that's part of the function of human beings. We pop people into categories. They can be young, and often people can talk about young people. I hear descriptions like these young people, they're feral. We can have understandings of young people as being very different to us and every generation does it, but we all do it. We like to put people into categories. So that's one of our challenges. The biases can become wired in our brains. I remember doing this training once with a Greek Cypriot, definitely a Greek Cypriot, someone of Greek Cypriot heritage, and he described himself as that, not me. But he was saying that when he goes up by the diocesan office, there are a number of Turkish restaurants. And he said, and he's a young man, he's in his mid-30s, he said, I never go into a Turkish restaurant. In fact, I find it really annoying when we're often offered to go to a Turkish restaurant. Now, he's 30-something. He's nothing to do with the war that occurred between Cyprus and Turkey. And yet it's hardwired through his acculturation that he is different and that they are other. And when I say they are other means negatively other. And so we can hardwire our children, and then we can have biases against people just by the very nature of their difference to us. And I always remember that. And so biases are learned through culture and experience, and they are contextual. Our biases are contextual. And they come out most prevalent when we're under what's called a cognitive or emotional load. So that means when we've got to make a decision quickly, our biases come to the fore because it's the quick thinking. So when we've got to sift and sort, that's when you'll see our biases. And the people that we see and the situations that we find ourselves in can create that pattern and that context for us. One of the things that I saw a picture just as I was coming here. I was in the car looking at something, and I can remember this. I actually think I remember the moment. I think it was X Factor. Was it X Factor? Susan Boyle. Oh, there's a classic example. She came onto the stage, and nobody expected anything that was going to be good. Because the assumptions that were made about this woman before she opened her mouth were negative. Because of our society's ways in which it speaks about people of a particular body shape, I think you said earlier, maybe a particular age, gender and age put together. So an older woman of a particular shape, well, already not very interesting, according to the mores of our media-driven image society. And then she sang, and, well, that was the bit of history that was made. So that's the thing about the quick thinking and the assumptions and the way in which society sets patterns for us to make a decision. There's a book about something it's called Whistling Vivaldi. And it speaks into this situation, and it tells the story, the book is named after the story of a young man who used to whistle Vivaldi when he was walking on the streets. Because, what is Vivaldi? Who is Vivaldi? He's a composer of? So, who generally knows about the work of Vivaldi? Musicians? Concert goers. So would you expect an 18-year-old black boy to be whistling Vivaldi? So what he found was that if he was on the street in an unusual area where he was of a minority, he would whistle Vivaldi. Because that would break down some of the immediate stereotypes about what people might think about him, i.e. a dangerous young black man that might be a criminal. So he would whistle Vivaldi.
Great question about the slow thinking and the fast thinking. You might be going to mention this later, but doesn't your fast, because you said they run together, doesn't your fast thinking sometimes block the slow thinking because you've already made your decision?
We'll come to that. Exactly. So by this young man he tried to, upset the apple cart of the usual system by making people think, aha, he's different. So we're going to not put him into the box. Okay. So we're going to take a little bit of time now, just another, just 10 minutes, no more. I think after the slide comes up, let me see. Yeah, just to spend some time, again, to give us a break, talking about some patterns that you notice around you in everyday life. So what groups of people do you often see? I heard earlier about in some places, lots of difference, in some places, lots of similarities. So in your areas of work, most of you are lay people, you work in different places. What kind of patterns of people or groups do you see yourself mixing with, working with? Are they diverse? Are they the same? Just have a quick, catch up. Just 2 or 3 more minutes now, and then we'll come back together. We're going to come back together now. Thanks very much. Thank you for that. So we're going to start with the first question that's up there about the patterns or associations of people or groups that you might notice around you in your everyday or work life. If you could shout them out, that would be quite good. Any patterns or associations or groups of people that you might notice as a group that coalesces together? Any particular group? In your work environment? No groups?
I used an example. I don't work at the moment. I haven't worked for 6 years. But I used to work on London Underground. And London Underground is like a big family. And if you're part of the team, there is that sense of belonging. Whether you're working on a station or whether you're an engineer visiting a station.
Okay. But were there different categories of people who did different jobs who within those London Underground? It's only because I can think of people who worked in London Underground, and when my godfather came over, it might have been, let's say, on the buses, the Clippies were female,
Yes.
and the conductors, often men, and the drivers were a different category, more skilled perhaps. So there was levels of skills. So you might have got, generally, back in the day, the drivers were mostly white. When the Caribbean and people came through, then it might have been the conductor, males, might have been black or brown, but definitely the Clippies were going to be female, because it took a while before you got them. Yeah? Would that be about right? So I'm just thinking about those kind of categories. So one I wrote down there, and it's not, I'm just thinking about, in my area, which is in Addiscombe, the Deliveroo drivers I don't see many white British men who are Deliveroo drivers. I don't. I mean, I'm sure there must be some in some part of the country, but certainly not in Addiscombe. And I use that category broadly because they do come from a variety of ethnic identities as far as I can see, but I don't see very many white British men. Now, I was surprised once I saw a bunch of, and I know they were Portuguese women, who were operating out of Streatham. And I was shocked because there were these little kind of biker moped group of Portuguese women who, because you know they all line up outside the particular set of restaurants. So I came and I thought I could hear this Portuguese being spoken. I looked around and I saw about 6 women who were, and they were all, you know, well, Just Eat or Deliveroo. But that's a new category for us, isn't it? So, you know, because we never used to have that really 5 years ago. So that was one group I noticed. So anything like that. There was a time when perhaps, well, certainly in Coventry, all the newsagents were Asian. Probably not every one, but majority of them. Became. When I first came to Britain, of course, they weren't. That's how they became. So any kind of patterns like that that you notice where you just have to start to build an expectation that when you go into a particular shop or this is what you're going to see.
I found in construction it went with different companies. So a lot of the big contractors are quite conservative with a small c and nearly all white. But my office of engineers, I think fully half of them were from the Indian subcontinent or Africa or whatever.
Yeah.
Extremely mixed. Yeah. Quite different. So, but the same industry, but some organisations had done something that others hadn't. Maybe, I don't know. It's just observing.
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying, because these patterns differ. They shape shift. They're not all the same everywhere. Your reality of where you work is not going to be the same as mine. So that's why I'm not making assumptions. I'm just saying.
Well, somebody in our group did mention the staff room in a school is mainly female.
Yeah.
Certainly most primary schools now.
Absolutely.
You're really an exception if you're male.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely correct. And it's like we never expected to have male nurses. So I remember when, what's his name? Is it Gary Tilsey? On Coronation Street, was a nurse. See? So guys don't watch ITV. Oh, when I came into this country, there were those of us who watched ITV, i.e. the working class white and black, and then there were those of us who never put on the BBC, because certainly not BBC Two, because we didn't understand what was going on BBC Two, and people would turn on to ITV and they go, oh, there's got all those adverts, I'm not watching that, you know, I'm not having a programme with adverts in. Don't you remember those times? Come on. So yes, but obviously, like I said earlier about the whistling Vivaldi, there's now such a wonderful mishmash. But absolutely, there are differences across occupations. There are differences across areas of Britain, and what you might find in London is not going to pertain in Surrey. What you might find up in like where I am, and I'm on the edge. Addiscombe is on the edge of the inner city. But when you come out to Purley, it can look very, very, very different. So it's the associations around you. You were going to say? Okay. One of the other associations I find interesting is the Mothers' Union. It's not quite the Women's Institute, but the Mothers' Union can look very different. So if you go into Kennington, Mothers' Union members there are nearly all from Sierra Leone or Zimbabwe. And when you come out to our lovely area, and the Mothers' Union are mostly older, not always, but older white ladies. So again, it's one organisation, but depending on geographically where you are, it represents a whole range of different people. But if I just said, the Mothers' Union, I come out here and people will go, yeah, we know exactly what she means by the Mothers' Union. Japan, Jerusalem. And then you go into another area and you mention the Mothers' Union, and it's women who work with potentially midwives in very challenging communities in Zimbabwe, all doing good work, but doing some on-the-ground work. So it's very different. And care workers are also another group where we found, didn't we, in this country, that with Brexit and the pandemic, we lost a lot of care workers, and then we found out that many of our care workers came from ethnic communities. So which maybe we didn't know before, we didn't notice before, but suddenly we notice this association of people by identity or gender or whatever. So these things, they're there, and they're these patterns that exist, and because we see them, we get used to them. So one of the examples I always like to use, and you will all know this person, and she probably will be embarrassed, but I always do it. It's our diocesan secretary. If you went into Trinity House on an average day, and the diocesan secretary was pottering around, you might not make the assumption that she was the diocesan secretary. And I certainly know that there's been occasions when people have come in and probably thought she was the person on the desk, or the person bringing in a tea into, a meeting, because she's walked in with a couple of cups saying, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And someone's thought, "Oh yeah, she's the person that's making the tea." And then when you get to realize, oh, actually, that maybe somewhat older lady is the most powerful lay person in the diocese. It's a different, but it's the assumption that we have that if we say CEO or Chief Executive Officer, we somehow have an idea of what that might look like, gender and age. So there are these patterns, and we can use them to make assumptions, and those assumptions are the unconscious biases, and they can present a significant challenge in the workplace because they may introduce unintentional prejudice, and that unintentional prejudice makes for poor decision making. And that's the point about this is the whole point. It makes for poor decision making. So, yeah.
This isn't meant to be a criticism.
No, I don't take things as criticism.
You made a comment, a bit of a sort of a throwaway comment about Archdeacon Purley, as if there was some difference. Just as a matter of interest, Christchurch School, just recently, of which I'm a governor, recently did a survey. 68% of the pupils are UK ME, and there's 55 different languages spoken within those 240 kids. But people think of Purley, and it's immediately white, middle upper class, affluent.
Yes. And I do know that.
Yeah,
Yeah. No.
That is where that unconscious bias comes in.
I spent today writing something about the perceived and the real differences and divides between the quote-unquote north and the quote-unquote south, and the fact that in the quote-unquote north there are pockets of affluence, and in the quote-unquote south there are deep pockets of poverty and challenge and disadvantage for families. And as I said, my communications with the Metropolitan Police often lets me know about some of the issues that they have to deal with in terms of safety and in terms of criminality, burglary, and all kinds of issues. So I may, as you say, make that general comment about the North and the South, but I know that within that there are deep things that bring us together more than we expect there to be. But yes, there are lazy assumptions about one being white and one being more minority ethnic, one being poor and one being more affluent. And affluent is, what's the right word I was going to say? Where I come from in Barbados, we have people who live in very big houses. But we would say that some of the people that live in the biggest houses have the worst diets, because they're so busy trying to keep the mortgages up for their house, they don't have enough money for food. And they're struggling financially, actually. And it's relative, that's what I was going to say. Affluence is relative, because who knows what's having to be done to be able to maintain that quote-unquote external level of affluence. So no, I thank you for that, but there are, and it's good to point it out, because that is one of the lazy assumptions. And we've got some major estates, in Rose Hill. We've got some of the estates. I'm just thinking. I think Selsdon. We've got some real challenging areas, and they are growing. And the pandemic hasn't obviously assisted the challenges, and in our schools particularly. And I was speaking actually to the Archdeacon of Reigate about the challenges that in some of the schools down there, where they are facing some of these same issues as well. But often the problem is the resources therefore the work that's needed are more biased to the areas where people perceive there to be the bigger problem. Yeah? So it may be harder to get access to services, even though this is a more affluent place, than it is in places of greater disadvantage, because that's the way services are tilted. So you're absolutely correct. So thank you, and if I slip upon lazy biases, do let me know as well. Because we're going to be talking about some biases now. So if we could have the next slide. So this is what we call affinity bias. Now, if you go onto Wikipedia, you'll find that there are about 170 different types of biases that we can have. 170, and more probably. But we're going to focus just on 2. And clearly, a bias is like an affinity, and we do have natural affinities. We have affinities maybe to our family, we have affinities to people that we went to school with, we have affinities to things that we share in common, you know, like our crazy football clubs that we might like, if you like football, or rugby, or any other sport, or no sport, or music, or any of those things that, you know, I love jazz, so I've got great affinity with people who love jazz, and they can look often very much not like me. So affinities cross all kinds of boundaries, and we have them. So things that we have as affinities connect us more easily. And what we call those things can be what we call a halo effect. Yeah? Because you might like something that I like, and because you like it, and I like it, then you're like a little saint, because we like the same things. So I can see the little halo around you because we just happen to like the same things. So we might have absolutely nothing else in common, but if we both like Crystal Palace Football Club, Arsenal, Tottenham, don't know which one, you know, then we might. Every Friday I go to a meeting, and there's always a discussion about how horrible Tottenham is, and it's because the person who runs it is an Arsenal fan. So we always start off with a bit of a conversation about Tottenham, just like that. So, affinity bias. Individuals and groups gravitate towards people who are like themselves, and that affects us in a number of ways. So we can value their opinions more, we might trust them more, we might. And we might think that we like them more because we've got things in common with them. We might make some assumptions about that. But by making those assumptions, that because we've got things that we like in common, we can do all kinds of things. And then the next slide will put them all up. It can impact who we appoint. And we know that we've been doing lots of work about safer recruitment and all of that, because, you know, if you talk about the Church of England, for a long time, bishops that were being appointed looked a particular way, went to a particular set of university, colleges, and so on and so forth, yeah? So it can affect the way we appoint people or recruit people. It can affect the way we coach and sponsor and encourage people. It can affect the way in which we delegate responsibility. It can affect the way in which we provide feedback. And for myself, in terms of my role and my responsibilities, but other people in leadership, it can affect the way in which we do our appraisals of people, all on the basis of what we believe is a common affinity. And I've seen this at work, you know, around someone who went to a particular college. In fact, I actually heard it today. I was listening to David Lammy speaking. He was on a webinar, and he was just talking about his own experience. But because he had a particular set of connections in his life experiences, like going to Harvard, like because he knew a particular person, getting his fees to Harvard being paid by a particular group, and so on and so forth, he actually got exposed to a lot of possibilities and opportunities by the nature of the people that he had affinity with. That's what happens. I think they used to call it the old boys network. And he was admitting it and saying, you know, this wouldn't have happened to me if those set of coincidences and incidences hadn't occurred and I knew those kind of people. So, for instance, he was saying, I can't remember the exact story, but he was saying somebody he worked for, Alan Sugar used to come and deliver to them. Because it was a panel on issues to do with race and Judaism and things like that. It was very interesting, but he was just talking about, because of where he comes from in Tottenham and his connections, you know. But it was just fascinating. But it was this business about who we select, who we elect, who we sponsor, and how we give appraisal. So if somebody we know quite well, we might actually let them slip out from appraising them appropriately, because we kind of go, they'll catch up. Because I know that they're all right, because they've got that level of capacity. We don't know anything about them. They're probably really lazy, but they know how to play the system. But other people, we come down on, because we don't know them so well. So the standards that we set are much harder and harsher, and people don't get through in the same way. So, and it is real, and it's in the mind of the person being assessed as well as the assessor. So when you come into a room, you may make an assumption about the person that is in the room. You may assume that they are going to assess you in a particular way, and therefore your response will be muted, and therefore you may not even get through, because you're so worried about what you think they're going to think about you, you don't allow yourself to be your true self. And in some circumstances, people don't expect anything of you, so they rush through the interview because they never expected anything of you in the first place, because of whatever it is that makes you different. So, commonality can lead to comfort, and it can lead to incompetence, because we make assumptions about it. We give people the benefit of the doubt when we should stop and think. One of my examples is I ran a black mental health charity in Brent for a while, about 18 months, and we were all female, except for the directors of the charity. We were all female workers. I had 3 staff. All my staff were of Jamaican origin or heritage. I'm from Barbados. I made a lazy assumption that we're all female and we're all of Caribbean heritage. And I made a comment which I actually know because of the research for my PhD, I knew what I was talking about. But they took it as I was being ethnocentric towards them. And they put in a complaint against me because of my bias. Looking from the outside, we all look the same. But within, and I assumed affinity when there was none such. So that's the other challenge that we can find as well. But often the way that happens is that we make these lazy assumptions and we don't do our job rigorously enough. So the next bias we're going to look at is confirmation bias. So we seek to confirm what we already believe, and we ignore the contradictory evidence. So we may assume that somebody that went to Oxford or Cambridge, just as an example, or Durham, or I don't know, Exeter, or all these other Russell Group or the top level universities, and get a first, we may assume that they have a particular capacity. And so all they have to do is confirm it, not even by doing very much, but actually by doing very little. But because we've already got in our heads that they're going to be good at it, they can do something quite mediocre and we go, see, brilliant, knew they were fantastic. But actually, they're not that good. And that, like affinity bias, does exactly the same thing. Because what we do is we exaggerate the confirmatory evidence and we downplay the contradictory evidence. You know, we'll see it, but we might ignore it because we'll kind of go, no way, he's this, she's that, they were there, no way. I don't know in your context what that might be. It might be somebody who is, so my friend, and he's no longer there, I don't think he is, but he was the director of New Wine. So you might make assumptions that, well, he's like this. So he only has to do this thing. And you go, yeah, of course he's, because that's what it is, isn't it? Because he's that person. And actually, I know Paul won't let me saying any of this, and actually it might not even be the case. It might not even be the case. Because some people are good at, what's that word, blagging? And living on the reputation of whatever it is that makes people want to confirm excellence or brilliance or otherwise. And I suppose that my little p politics will be, I think it's being played out at national level at the moment. And I think as Christians we're all deeply disappointed in the lack of values that are being held up in our leadership at this time. And I think it's very sad. And that is just politics with a small p, not any big P at all, because I'm very disturbed by the lack of moral compass that I'm seeing. And we're trying to get people to hold to a moral compass that we truly believe is our Christian imperative. It's hard when you see it falling down around you. So confirmation bias. Now, do you know what it used to be said about interviews, about when people make a decision in an interview? How long does it take someone to make a decision about whether they're going to appoint or not? 30 seconds. 8. 10. 10 seconds. 10 seconds is the average that people make before they, because that's the confirmation. And they either then spend the rest of the time confirming what they're hearing, or playing down, or confirming what they actually don't want to hear. I don't like that person anyway because I never thought they were going to be good, so I'm going to listen to all the contradictory things and not listening to the possibilities, but I'm going to listen to the negatives. Yes. So that's, there was another thing called, there was some research where teachers were told that some students had been identified as high achievers. The teachers were told this, that this is the group of high achievers. And within 6 months, they actually were all high achievers. But they were selected at random. But it's how much effort that you then put into enabling them to be high achievers. So we do that, and then we treat those who we think are not going to be high achievers differentially. And so these biases can be pernicious. And we might be talking about hiring and firing and mentoring and all those kind of high-level things, but actually they pertain to the way in which we operate within the spaces called church in the same way. Who we encourage and who we don't see to undertake responsibilities and roles. And you have to be actively ensuring that you're started with this, that you're looking out for everyone to see what they can bring to the table. But often, if we've got any form of bias, we just won't see certain people. We just won't. So the next slide. So it says, can you identify any blind spots in your church or organization? And that's the question for you to think about. Yeah? I'm not going to sit down and do it time-wise, but can you? Can you think about some areas? Some of the, I think I was listening to Paul Bayes the other day, and he talked about the dark corners, the bits that we forget to sweep. And sometimes we might find situations or people struggling away in those dark corners. And maybe they don't. Maybe the light shines really brightly everywhere. But most places there are dark corners. So that would be something for you to reflect on. Next one. Okay. So these are some other dimensions of bias. Do you like the picture of the tall man and the little man? Shorter man. sorry, shouldn't say little, get in trouble with whatever that actor in America who's been talking about the little people recently, and the new Snow White movie that may be made or may not be made, or whatever else it is. Well, the bias is there. Something is around gender, something's around height. So the 30% of company directors are over 6'2" in America. I think it might be even higher. Whereas in the population, it's nowhere near that. Nowhere near that. It's where our biases are, that we think that tall men are natural leaders, and so we just appoint tall men. And I think, and I can be shot down, that in the more evangelical churches, many of the leaders are tall. And I know that. I have witnessed it. There is something about looking at the attractability of the leadership, and one of them is around height. So that was one, and then I think the middle one, it was just an assumption. It was whether, when we look at the person in the picture, what assumptions do we make about the role and responsibilities that person in the picture might be playing. Thankfully, more and more, we no longer would think that she is going to be in the tourism industry and behind a desk or doing something more middle management, but she could be the CEO. But back in the day, I would have to say, it would have been more likely that would not have been our understanding of what roles that a young black woman might be playing in our society. So the next, so this one just talks about in-groups and out-groups, and I don't need to go into it much, but because of the affinity biases that I've talked about, what tends to happen, and we call them cliques, don't we? That's all. You know them. You know when you have a clique, you know what it means. There's in and there's out. And those who are out are less likely to be involved, and those who are in get on with it. And in some churches, you might have a very small group of insiders who do everything and keep out other people from being able to be involved. And some churches, they say, well, we've only got a small group of people, so we have to deal with who we've got. But in some churches, and I was hearing about a church, that group of people kind of hold power. So just think about, again, in your church, where do you see the in-groups and where do you see the out-groups? Okay. Now, I'm going to... Mm-hmm. Yep, go ahead.
Which is that we think that we're open, and therefore there's anybody can come in. But actually, when you look from the outside, you're not as open.
Yeah.
We're not as open.
Yeah.
So to stop being in groups.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, absolutely. So I'm just going to, because I don't want us to go on too long, because I want to do one particular thing that I often don't get a chance to do. But in terms of, it is really important to reflect on in-groups and out-groups, because most churches, if you ask them, they will say, we're really hospitable, we're really welcoming, we love everybody that comes in, etc., etc., etc. That's a standard. I mean, you'd have to be a strange church to not say all of that. But I remember my own church, that the first church I was a curate, the lady Joyce, who sat on the welcome desk, I don't know why we called it the welcome desk. That really was the way she welcomed people. I'm not joking. I was a curate. My incumbent was ill, and I used to say, I really had no power. And I just used to sit there and think, what can I do? But the only job she loved was sitting on that desk. So I spent my 3 years trying to make her smile. Because she just was quite a miserable person. Her life wasn't easy, but she really was. But she loved that desk, so you just had to work with it, because that was the way of including her. But what I did was I bolstered it by having other people. So she kept her job, But I had other people who were just like the secondary welcomers, you know. So she'd give them that, and then there'd be somebody kind of taking them to their seats, or, you know, just doing something else. Because I didn't want to exclude her from what she really did like doing. And you just have to find those ways of doing things to encourage people, even if sometimes they, you know, they can't see beyond themselves as to how the impact they're making on other people around them. Okay, so let's do something which is going to get you to stand up, and it's going to take no longer than about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll come to an end to some of the points that Doug wanted me to ask me about, what we do about thinking slowly and fastly at the same time. So stand up. Let me see. Come forward. Come forward into the open space. So you're going to have to, those of you who don't want to be too close, then if you can manage it, okay? So see if you can manage this one. And I will be mindful of both the fact that some people don't want to be, can't be in a closed space. Well, let's see. So this is called the inclusion temperature check. See if you can manage it. And if you can't move up and down, I'll ask you to point where you think you're going to be. So these are the rules of the game. Listen carefully to the statements I'm going to make. Reflect on the actual experience of this church and not the aspirations of this church. Okay? And over there is agree. So what I say, and if you agree with it, either you move to it, or if you can't move, and you stay around there, and then I'll ask the people in the middle where they would rather be, if it's in the middle or over there, yeah? That's so people don't have to kind of dash about too much. Okay. And this is the fence, unless you can't move too quickly, because we're going to do it at speed. Try to avoid the fence, okay? Unless you have to be. So, agree, disagree. Okay, let's see. Everyone in our church is valued regardless of their job title. Agree? Disagree. Okay. Okay. So this is for you to observe. It's not what you know, but who you know that makes a difference in this church. Agree? Disagree. It's not what you know, as you said, it's different. It's not what you know, but who you know that makes a difference in this church. Agree? Disagree. There are no barriers to women in this church. Agree? Disagree. There are no barriers to women in this church. Agree? Disagree. Okay. This church is willing to engage and address difficult issues. Agree? Disagree. Okay. Our senior leaders are great role models for diversity and inclusion. Agree? Disagree. Finally, I am a great role model for diversity and inclusion. Agree? Disagree?
Because I just don't know. How do I know?
Don't be humble. How do you feel? Okay, well, that's fine. Christchurch Purley. That's a simple exercise, but it's one for you to all reflect on. We can take our seats again.
You have to be told you're a role model. Because somebody has to say to you, you are my role model. I don't know whether I am. If I say I'm a great role model, I'm actually not being humble.
I said don't be humble.
Oh, yeah.
I said don't be humble. Okay. As I said, a simple exercise, but it's one to help us to really reflect on what we're trying to do as a church, as the bigger church, and to live out what we believe is God's call upon us to be inclusive, to love the ways in which God has blessed us and made us so different, and to use all of those differences for the building up of the kingdom. And if we find that there are places that we need to work on, then you've started to do that work by looking at the words and the work of the Anti-Racism Charter and starting to find ways to live that out. In terms of how do we deal with the fast thinking and the slow thinking in the ways in which we do them together? I don't know which slide may come up next. If we keep going to the next one, let's see. As we're almost through them, but okay, I'll say them because you've got the slides. So one of the things that we can do, and these are really positive, practical things that we can do, is that the first thing we can do is when we come to a decision where we know something's happened and we're not sure if we're operating out of our big thinking, big brain, or if we're trying to get to understand our biases that might be present in a situation, the thing is to slow down. Just give ourselves, we always talk about the 10-second rule, don't we? So let's just slow down. And also, when we're next thinking of something that we need someone to do, don't just give it to the same person. Think about somebody else that might be able to undertake that responsibility. Don't do the easy way of saying, do you know what? They always do it really well, so I'll just give it to them. But we all do it. So depending on the type of work, really think about, does it have to be that person? Role models. When I meet someone who I might automatically not know enough about, that's the way I would put it, or not be able to I don't want to use just the word suspicious, but people who in my consciousness I'm not sure about, we need to just park our thoughts and remember other people that we may have seen or heard of who are really positive in that role. And that's in so many ways. We can make assumptions on the basis of gender, on the basis of age, as I said earlier. So we need to park our usual quick response and think about other people who might actually do that really, really, really well. And that depends on what it is. It could be politics, it could be different positions. It's so many ways in which people are really amazing, positive role models. And they're from the same background of the person that we might be not able to put into a pigeonhole, and therefore we don't think of positively. So that one of the things I wrote down is we might, if we've got a magazine, we might think about the things we put in our magazine. So for instance, where I live in Addiscombe, they've got, I'm sure you've got them down here, the Residents Association magazine. When I look at the pictures in the Addiscombe magazine that comes out, I mean, I know that the folk who produce it, and you can tell, and they say it, so I'm not making assumptions, are a particular age group and like particular things like railway sleepers or something or the other that they like to go around and take pictures of. But I don't take pictures of young people in there. I don't see many pictures of the kind of stuff that young people in the area are doing. I don't see things about some of the new communities that are moving into the area. It's just the same old, same old, same old. So how do we make our things not the same old, same old, same old? Just find different interests and different people to express those interests. Because the way we do it in our magazines, you never know. People start to look at it and say, oh, I never knew that. And that really helps. And then the other thing is, individuate. So we might, I mentioned the Mothers' Union earlier, so we might make an assumption, oh, the Mothers' Union are all like Jam and Jerusalem. Oh, we kind of know what they like. Actually, no, we don't. So start to think of people more as individuals. Spend time with individuals from that group. Get to know them better. I used to know a colleague who came to minister to what we would say is a majority black congregation church, and he'd never ministered to a majority black congregation church, and he was having real difficulty, and he came to talk to me about it, and I said to him, do you talk to any people of colour apart from when you go to church? And he said, no. No friends, no social contacts. Well, how does he think he can minister to folk who he has no camaraderie, interrelationship, connectivity with? Because you can't, because they'll always be seemingly different to you. So make friends with folk who are different. And, that will help. That will help. One of the things it says here is get tested. Well, there are lots of implicit bias tests online, and you can check them out. We did them as senior leadership for the diocese, so, all of us, the bishops and everybody did it. And some of you, clergy, will certainly know, and some lay folk may know what our senior leadership team looks like. So we did the one about the identity, ethnic identity one, and being a Harvard thing, it throws it up really quickly, and it throws up images, and you have to make quick, snap judgments about what a word association with the image that's thrown up in front of you, and you get your results at the end. And it is just quick, snap judgments, because it's looking at the quick thinking. And somebody got an almost perfect test. I was the only black person. So they assumed that I was the one with the perfect result. Because there were images of black people or brown people, and my results weren't bad. I mean, I was probably second, but I did not have the best results for the test in terms of being, not making any judgments about people based on what the identity that was thrown up looked like. It wasn't me. It was actually a lovely white woman. It wasn't me. But the assumption in the room was, oh, well, what's Rosemary even doing the test for? Because she doesn't need to do it. Huh? Just because I have a particular skin color does not mean that I have any more privilege in being better able to understand, as I said earlier, people who also have a similar skin color to me, depending on our experience and context. I can be as British as a white person of the same age that I grew up with, and very different to a brown or black person of the same age that grew up in a different culture. So one can't make the assumption that I would automatically get these things right. So, and that's another one. Just don't assume that a person of color is going to be great at talking to a person of color. It's all right, just put those two together because they'll know what to say to each other. Just don't do that. And so I said earlier about having contact. And the other thing is about having super categories. So if you which are more important to the things that bring us together than the things that divide us, which I talked about earlier. So when we talked about the way in which our communities across the south and the north can be so similar, but we can often use it as a point of, wow, you know, people up there or people down there, or, you know, nobody in South Croydon cares anything about people in the north, or they don't understand the issues that we deal with, or blah, 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 blah. You know, it's not true. So find the super categories that connects us, and then we'll find that we've got more in common than we've got separately. And so this one says, if it says it's up there, it says avoid reinforcement. Avoid reinforcement. So avoiding reinforcement, for me, and I really do this, is I read the Times, the Telegraph online, the Daily Mail, even the Daily Express. Because I want to avoid reinforcing my bubble. So, and that's what we do if we don't look elsewhere at the perceptions of other people. We will just reinforce our own understandings, and those will be the biases that we will then, you know, live out in our daily lives or in our church lives or whatever else. So that's the way we do the slow and the fast thinking together. And when we find ourselves, particularly in points where we're making decisions about people or about the things that we might encourage, then we need to just stop and use any of those techniques to allow ourselves to be really reflective about how we are as inclusive of God's wonderful diversity that he gifts us in this place. So we've had a look at some issues using the temperature check, and you as a church are doing work around your diversity group. And I think that as in terms of your diversity group, one of the things that you can do is think about, and there's one of the slides, and I'm just going to go through it, and then because we're coming to the end, think about what you are planning to do, the processes that you'll need to use to get there, what the impact will be, what you think the impact is going to be, and then how long you're going to take to get there so you can monitor and evaluate it. And that's for the church. But as you do it for the church, you need to do it. The leaders, lay and ordained, need to do it for themselves. And then everyone needs to do it individually for themselves. Because it's not about the organization and it's not about the leader. It's about each and every one of us. And if it's not in here, then we can't expect that the leader's going to carry it or the church is just going to be it. If we're not it, we are the living stones of our Lord's church. Every single one of us have been beautifully, beautifully crafted by He who is the potter. And each of us have been made in our beautiful ways to build up His wonderful church, like how you put dry stone walls together. All of us have been made to be like that and to come together to be that building, that firm foundation of His kingdom. We've all got a role to play. We as the church, we as leaders, and we as individuals all have to make sure that we're playing our part. And one of the ways of doing that is to be aware of the nature and the impact of unconscious bias in our lives. So I'll just end as I began. A new command I give you: love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Thank you very much.
Rosemary, thank you very much. if I might just take one more minute, and I hope you don't mind, just to share a little story. The first time Rosemary and I met as Archdeacon and Vicar, we had without going into details, a robust conversation to have. I suspect during that conversation you made some assumptions about me and I made some assumptions about you, because we'd never come across each other before, and so we didn't have that affinity. We had, non-affinity bias, and we probably confirmed a few things about one another as well. But then it came to my MDR, which is the sort of ministerial development review, which is a conversation that you have with your Archdeacon as part of your development as vicar. And the way you led that was very open. I probably learned as much about you as you learned about me. And I think that as a result of that, I found out some surprising things about you. You might have found out a few surprising things about me. And those biases, hopefully, were put to one side. And so I think that individuate is what I would emphasise amongst the many things that you brought to us tonight, which is that it's about that relationship, isn't it? It's about getting to know one another. So thank you. Thank you for what you shared this evening. Thank you for being our Archdeacon. And I wonder if we could offer a round of applause for the support that we've had this evening. So thank you so much. Next steps are we've got our PCC in March, so I'm sure we can put some time in there to pick up and watch back over the video and some of the challenges that you set us, and we can take those next steps as well. So.
That would be fantastic. And the one thing I would say as well is, as a diocese, we are so proud of every step. It's like being a parent. We're proud of every step that our churches are taking to really be this kingdom that we represent. We are one of the most diverse dioceses in the church, and quite honestly, we are working very hard, and we're very proud of every step that our churches are taking. So please, don't be humble. Let us know. Tell Sophia. Let's get it into the bridge, because the thing, if you do it, it's going to give the opportunity and the example for another church that might say, do you know what? We're a bit like Christ Church Purley, but we never thought we could ever do that. Let's have a word with them. Let's see how they're doing it. Let's see if we can walk together. And that would be so wonderful, because often people say to me, how do we start it in our churches? Well, this is what you've done. It's what you've done. I'm coming along, basically, to affirm and confirm the work that's already been started, which is brilliant. So really be exemplars, and role models. And whatever the challenges are, you're working on them, because you're committed to work on them. And that's how change comes about. So I'm really thankful to have been here tonight.
So thank you, Rosemary, and thank you to everyone for coming along this evening. Thank you.